welcome. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Or, I might show up at your door. I'm just here to share some creepy stories, so sit back and enjoy. Disclaimer: the content presented in the video is purely for entertainment purposes only. The theories and stories discussed in this video are speculative and are not supported by any evidence or proof. Viewer discretion is advised. I first saw the warning while I was sitting in my weather station, staring at the radar. The screen flickered just for a second, but long enough to make me wonder if the storm front moving in had started interfering with the signal. It wasn't unusual. Out here, in the middle of nowhere, the equipment wasn't always reliable. The emergency alert tone blasted through the radio before I even had time to process what was happening. Not the usual weather advisory beep, but the other one, the one they used for missing children, nuclear threats, or, God forbid, a real national emergency. The sound made my chest tighten instinctively. I turned to the small emergency TV mounted above my desk. The screen had switched to the familiar black background with yellow text. Emergency alert system. Civil danger warning. That was strange. I'd seen weather warnings and amber alerts before, but civil danger? That was new. Then the text started scrolling. This is an emergency alert. Avoid the new moon. Remain indoors. Do not look outside. Do not respond to voices. I read it twice, then a third time. Avoid the new moon? What the hell did that even mean? I pulled out my phone, checking the calendar. The new moon was tomorrow night. The message repeated itself twice before the screen cut to static, and then the regular programming resumed like nothing had happened. I sat there for a moment, absorbing the words. The logical part of my brain told me it had to be a mistake. Maybe a test message sent out too early? The phrasing was weird, though. Usually, alerts at least tried to be professional. But this felt frantic. I reached for my radio mic and clicked it on. This is Daniel Greaves at Station 7. Did anyone else just get that alert? For a second, nothing but static. Then a familiar voice crackled through. Yeah, we got it too. Deputy Holloway, the local sheriff's right-hand man. His voice was laced with irritation. Scared the hell out of half the town. Any idea what it means? I was just about to ask you. I've got calls coming in from people wondering if it's a prank. No one at the county office is claiming responsibility. I frowned. Could be a false alarm. Maybe some intern hit the wrong button. Yeah, maybe. But he didn't sound convinced. Neither was I. I turned back to my computer, running a quick check on the NOAA weather system. No severe weather events, no emergency drills scheduled. No reason for an alert like that to go out. Still, there was something unsettling about it. The door to my station creaked open, and I nearly jumped out of my skin. I spun around to see Dr. Evelyn Carter, my closest colleague, standing in the doorway with a travel mug in one hand and a laptop bag slung over her shoulder. She raised an eyebrow. Jesus, Daniel, you look like you've seen a ghost. Close enough, I muttered, turning the monitor so she could see the alert text I'd copied down. You catch this? She squinted at it, lips pressing into a thin line. That's not a standard message. No kidding. Evelyn stepped inside, setting her bag down. I was checking the seismic activity logs earlier, and something weird popped up. The sensors recorded a low-frequency vibration, almost like an infrasound pulse, coming from the west side of town. I frowned. Could it be related? That's what I was wondering. She pulled out her laptop and started typing. It's not just seismic activity either. The local radio tower's been experiencing signal interference for the past week. Nothing major, just static bursts, brief loss of connection. Could be normal, could be something else. We exchanged glances. Neither of us had to say it. The last time we saw unexplained atmospheric disturbances, it had preceded a freak wildfire that burned for 3 days straight. That wasn't something you ignored. Before we could speculate further, the radio crackled again. This is Holloway. Got a situation here. I grabbed the receiver. What kind of situation? There was a pause. When Holloway spoke again, His voice was quieter. "A family's missing." I stiffened. "Missing?" "Yeah. The Wallace family, husband, wife, and their 2 kids. Neighbor says their car's in the driveway, but no one's answering the door." We checked inside. Front door was unlocked. No signs of struggle. Everything's still in place, coats on the rack, dinner plates on the table. But they're just gone. A chill ran down my spine. Evelyn tapped a few keys on her laptop. "The Wallaces live near the Western Ridge, don't they?" "Yeah," Holloway confirmed. "Why?" I looked at Evelyn. "That's where the signal disruption is coming from." For the first time, Holloway sounded uncertain. "You think it's connected?" I hesitated. Then, "I don't know." A heavy silence settled over the line. Then, "All right, well, let me know if you find anything. I'll keep you updated." The radio cut off. Evelyn leaned back in her chair. "This doesn't feel like a coincidence." "No," I admitted. "It doesn't." I glanced at the emergency alert still displayed on my screen. "If you hear a loved one outside, IT is not them." A lump formed in my throat. What the hell was coming with the new moon? I barely slept that night. After Holloway's call, I spent hours poring over weather patterns, seismic readings, and electromagnetic data, trying to find a logical explanation. I wanted anything that could explain what was happening. But nothing added up. The atmospheric disturbances near the Western Ridge were still there, showing low-frequency vibrations strong enough to register on the seismic charts. The radio static had worsened, filling the airwaves with strange, intermittent bursts of noise. And then there was the emergency alert. "Avoid the new moon. Do not look outside. Do not respond to voices." The phrasing was what disturbed me the most. It wasn't clinical or robotic like most alerts. It sounded frantic, as if whoever had sent it knew something we didn't. By the time dawn broke, I was exhausted. I made my way into town, hoping to get some answers. Strange disappearances. Creston was a small town, population just over 3,000, and the Wallaces' disappearance was already on everyone's lips. By the time I arrived at the sheriff's office, a small group of locals had gathered outside, murmuring among themselves. Some of them looked worried. Others just looked confused. I spotted Holloway near the entrance, talking to an older woman, Mrs. Gardner, one of the Wallaces' neighbors. She clutched a wool shawl around her shoulders, shaking her head. "They were just there last night," she was saying. "I saw the lights on in the kitchen when I took out the trash. And then nothing." Holloway nodded, jotting something down. "And you didn't hear anything strange? No shouting, no cars, no visitors?" "No," she said, then hesitated. "Actually, there was something." I stopped in my tracks, listening. She lowered her voice. "It was around midnight. I thought I heard someone talking outside. A man's voice. But when I looked, no one was there." Holloway frowned. "Could it have been the husband?" "No," she said, her voice firm, "because it wasn't coming from their house. It was coming from the trees." A chill crawled down my spine. Holloway let out a long breath. "All right, if you remember anything else, let me know." He turned and spotted me. "Greaves, you look like hell." "Didn't sleep," I admitted. "What's the update?" "Not much." He glanced at his notes. "Wallaces are still missing. No sign of forced entry, no sign of struggle. Their cars are still in the driveway, their phones still in the house. It's like they just vanished." I rubbed my temple. "What about security footage? Any cameras nearby?" He shook his head. "Closest one is at the gas station a few blocks away, and it didn't pick up anything useful." "Any new emergency alerts?" "None." I frowned. "That doesn't make sense. If this is a real threat, wouldn't they send more warnings?" "You'd think." Holloway sighed. "But the county's claiming they didn't send the first one. Says they don't know where it came from." I stared at him. "What?" He nodded grimly. "I called every agency I could. The state emergency office, the National Weather Service, even the goddamn FCC. No one's taking credit for that alert. As far as they're concerned, it doesn't exist." The back of my neck prickled. "So if they didn't send it, I swallowed. Who did? A town holding its breath. The rest of the day passed in a nervous haze. I met up with Evelyn at the local diner, where the tension in the air was almost palpable. People whispered in hushed tones, throwing uneasy glances toward the windows. The Wallaces weren't the first people to vanish in Creston, but something about this felt different. I slid into the booth across from her. Got anything? Evelyn sipped her coffee. The anomalies are getting worse. The infrasound pulse from the western ridge is growing stronger. It's almost like a signal. A signal for what? That's what I'm trying to figure out. She leaned in. You know what's weird? This isn't the first time we've recorded something like this. I raised an eyebrow. Go on. She tapped her laptop screen. Seismic records show similar low-frequency pulses occurring at regular intervals for the past decade. Always right before a new moon. A chill ran down my spine. How come we never noticed before? Because they were weaker, small enough to be dismissed as background noise. But lately, she exhaled, they're getting stronger. I let that sink in. So you think these pulses are connected to the disappearances? Evelyn hesitated. I think something happens here every new moon. And I think someone or something is trying to warn us. Another warning. That night, I stayed at the weather station, determined to monitor the anomaly firsthand. Evelyn left around midnight, and I was alone in the dim glow of the radar screens. Outside, the wind howled through the trees, rattling the metal siding of the station. I tried to focus on my work, but my mind kept drifting back to the Wallaces, to the voice Mrs. Gardner had heard in the trees. Then, at exactly 2:13 a.m., my computer screen flickered. The emergency alert tone blared through the room. I jumped, my pulse hammering in my throat. The TV screen above my desk switched to black with yellow text. This is an emergency alert. Avoid the new moon. If you hear a loved one outside, it is not them. I swallowed hard. The message repeated twice, then cut off abruptly. The room was silent, and then something knocked on the door. A slow, deliberate knock. I froze. The station was miles from town. No one should be out here. I turned toward the security monitor, my hands clammy. The camera feed outside the station was grainy in the low light, but it showed the front door clearly. There was no one there. Another knock. Harder this time. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to breathe. The emergency alert ran through my mind again. If you hear a loved one outside, it is not them. A voice followed the knock, low, distorted. Daniel. A cold wave of fear washed over me. It was my brother's voice, but that was impossible. My brother had been dead for 3 years. The knock came again. 3 slow, deliberate raps against the metal door. I forced myself to swallow the lump in my throat. My brother was dead. But the voice on the other side of that door, low, distorted, and eerily calm, sounded exactly like him. Daniel, it called again. It's me. I gripped the edge of my desk so hard my knuckles turned white. Don't respond. Don't open the door. That's what the alert said, but it was difficult. The human brain isn't wired to ignore the sound of someone it loves, even when you know it can't be real. I glanced at the security monitor. The camera outside still showed nothing, just an empty concrete landing and the dim glow of the station's floodlights. No one was there. Then why the hell could I hear knocking? My breathing grew shallow as the thing outside spoke again, its voice straining, unnatural. Danny, come on, man. The way it said my name, like it was testing how it fit in its mouth. Open the door. Just talk to me. I clenched my jaw. I had to ignore it. I reached for the radio with shaking fingers and pressed the call button. Holloway, you there? Static. I tried again. Sheriff's office? Do you copy? More static. I swore under my breath. The radio had been working earlier. I glanced back at the security feed. Still nothing. The thing outside pressed its palm against the door. I heard the faint scrape of skin on metal. My stomach twisted. Please, that one word almost broke me, because this time it sounded just like him. A glimpse of it. I don't know how long I sat there. 10 seconds? A full minute? My body was locked in place, my mind screaming at me to stay still. Then the floodlights flickered, just for a moment, and in that fraction of a second I saw something, a shadow tall and wrong, standing just outside the glow of the lights. Its body was longer than it should have been, limbs too thin, proportions just slightly off. It stood at the edge of the darkness, not moving. Watching, I felt an unbearable pressure in my chest, a primal, animal fear that made every hair on my body stand on end. Then the lights snapped back to full power. The figure was gone. The knock stopped. The voice outside whispered one last time, so soft I barely heard it. Next time, and then it was gone. The silence afterward. I sat there for what felt like hours, staring at the door. The security monitor still showed nothing. The wind had picked up outside, rattling the metal siding, but otherwise silence. I grabbed my phone and tried to call Holloway directly. No signal. I switched the radio to a different frequency. Still nothing. I needed to get the hell out of here. Slowly, I reached into my desk drawer and pulled out my handgun. I wasn't usually the paranoid type, but something about tonight felt different. I stood up, moving cautiously toward the door. And then, just as I reached for the handle, the emergency alert tone blared again. I flinched. My computer screen flickered, and the familiar black screen with yellow text appeared once more. This is an emergency alert. Avoid the new moon. Do not acknowledge them. Do not let them in. If you hear a loved one outside, it is not them. Stay indoors until daylight. My stomach dropped. Until daylight. I checked the clock. It was only 2:30 a.m. I was trapped here for another 4 hours. I slowly backed away from the door and locked it. My heart was still pounding, my hands clammy with sweat. I pulled over my chair and sat down, gun still in my grip. I just had to wait. The recordings. I don't know how long I sat there, maybe an hour before I remembered the station's audio logs. The emergency broadcasts automatically triggered recording sequences, meaning I had access to every alert that had played tonight. Maybe if I listened closely, I'd catch something, some kind of distortion, an extra voice, anything that could give me a clue. I plugged in my headphones and pulled up the most recent alert. The first few seconds were normal. The familiar monotone text-to-speech voice read out the warning exactly as it had played on the screen. Then, something in the background. I rewound, listened again. Yes, there it was. A faint whisper behind the official message. I boosted the audio levels, filtering out the main voice. The whisper grew clearer. I shouldn't have done that, because the whisper wasn't human. It was a low, garbled chittering, like something trying to imitate speech but not quite getting it right. A strange, wet clicking noise followed, like bones shifting inside flesh. My hands trembled as I increased the gain even more. The whisper turned into words. "We see you." I ripped off my headphones, heart hammering against my ribs. The room suddenly felt too small. The air, too heavy. I forced myself to breathe. Think. The emergency alert system was compromised. Someone or something was hijacking the broadcast. And if they could do that, how much else could they control? The final hours. I kept my gun within reach as I waited out the night. I don't remember sleeping. If I did, it wasn't for long. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the voice outside the door. My brother's voice. By the time the first rays of sunlight broke through the horizon, I felt like I was coming apart at the seams. I waited another half hour just to be sure. Then, cautiously, I unlocked the door. The cold morning air rushed in. The concrete landing outside was empty. The trees in the distance looked normal. The world looked normal. But as I stepped outside, I noticed something that made my stomach turn. Footprints leading up to the door. Not human. Too long. Too many toes. And the worst part, there were no footprints leaving. I stood frozen in the doorway, staring at the footprints. Too long. Too many toes. But that wasn't the worst part. The prints led up to the station, but there were no tracks leaving. I swallowed hard. My skin crawled with the sensation of being watched. The morning light had chased away the horrors of the night, but I could still feel something lingering. Something was still here. I forced myself to move. I needed to get to town. The drive back. I climbed into my truck and locked the doors before starting the engine. The familiar rumble of the old pickup felt like a lifeline to normalcy. As I pulled away from the station, I kept checking the rearview mirror. Nothing but the dirt road stretching behind me, the tree leaves swaying gently in the breeze. No movement, but my gut told me I wasn't alone. I turned on the radio, hoping for news, for another emergency alert, for anything. Static. I flipped through channels, my pulse quickening. Every station was the same. No music, no voices, just that low, crackling static. I tightened my grip on the wheel. The signal had been fine yesterday. I turned onto the highway leading into Creston, pushing the truck faster. I needed to talk to Holloway. The town feels wrong. As I approached the outskirts of town, I noticed something strange. No people. It was early, just past 7 a.m., but normally there'd be some activity. Cars on the road, people opening their shops, kids walking to the bus stop. But today, the streets were empty. I drove past the diner. The open sign flickered in the window, but inside, the booths were deserted. The gas station, vacant. The pumps stood idle, the attendant's booth dark. A deep, uneasy feeling settled in my chest. I pulled into the parking lot of the sheriff's office and cut the engine. Inside, the lights were on, but the place was eerily quiet. Then movement. I spotted Holloway sitting at his desk, staring at something on his computer screen. Relief washed over me. I stepped inside. "Holloway, we need to talk." He didn't react. "Holloway," still nothing. I walked closer. That's when I noticed his hands. They were trembling, his knuckles white as he gripped the arms of his chair. I followed his gaze to the computer monitor. The screen showed grainy black and white footage. A security feed. I recognized it instantly. It was my station, and the timestamp read 2:13 a.m., the exact moment something had knocked on my door. I felt my stomach knot as the footage played. I saw the station's floodlights flicker, just like I'd seen in real life. I saw the grainy figure standing just outside the glow, but in the recording, it moved. A long, jerky movement, like a marionette with broken strings. I watched as the thing tilted its head toward the camera, and then it stepped closer. The footage cut to static. Holloway exhaled shakily and finally turned to look at me. "What the hell is going on, Greaves?" A growing pattern. I sat down across from him. My throat felt dry. "Where did you get that footage?" He rubbed his eyes. "I had one of the deputies check the town's traffic cams this morning. Found weird gaps, random outages in the middle of the night. But not all the footage was corrupted." He gestured at the screen. This was still intact. I swallowed. "Did anyone else see this?" He shook his head. "Just me and one other deputy. She's out right now, checking on some of the people who called in missing persons reports." I tensed. "More people are missing?" Holloway gave me a grim look. "Not just the Wallaces. For more calls came in this morning. Whole families. Gone." A chill ran down my spine. This wasn't random. It was spreading. The broadcast anomaly. We pored over the footage and incident reports for the next hour, but none of it made sense. Then Evelyn burst through the door. Her face was pale. "You need to see this." She threw down a stack of printouts. Seismic readings. I scanned them quickly. My pulse quickened. The same low-frequency pulses she had detected near the western ridge had spiked dramatically just after midnight. Holloway frowned. "What does this mean?" Evelyn ran a hand through her hair. "I think it's connected to the emergency alerts. Something is piggybacking on the broadcast system." I stiffened. "Like a hijacker?" "No," she shook her head. "Like a signal." She pointed at a spectrogram analysis. "This is what normal emergency broadcasts look like. See the patterns?" Holloway and I nodded. She flipped to another page. "And this is what last night's alert looked like. The waveform was distorted. Wrong. Something else was embedded in the signal," she continued. "Something we didn't hear." Holloway muttered a curse under his breath. "You're saying the emergency alert wasn't just a warning. It was a message." Evelyn nodded. "And I think it wasn't meant for us." My stomach dropped. Holloway leaned forward. "What do you mean?" She hesitated. "I ran the signal through a decryption program. picked up something buried in the transmission. She pulled out her phone and pressed play. A low, inhuman chittering noise filled the room, followed by whispers, not in English, not in any language I recognized, but it sounded like speech, like something was trying to talk. And then one phrase, repeated in a hollow, mechanical tone. "Open the door." The blood drained from my face. Holloway swore. "What the hell does that mean?" I looked at Evelyn. "Did you try running it in reverse?" She nodded slowly. "Yeah." She hit play again. This time, the garbled speech sounded clear. A single sentence, repeated over and over. "We are already inside." The room fell into silence. Evelyn's phone still sat on the desk between us, the last echo of that unnatural voice fading into nothing. "We are already inside." None of us spoke. None of us breathed. The weight of those words pressed down on us, a cold realization settling in the pit of my stomach. This thing, whatever it was, wasn't coming. It was already here. The town is changing. Holloway broke the silence. "Okay, someone tell me what the hell that means." Evelyn shook her head. "I don't know, but whatever's interfering with the emergency broadcasts, whatever made that noise, it's acting like a signal. And it's spreading." I forced my voice to stay steady. "How?" She hesitated, then tapped the seismic readings she had printed. "See these frequency spikes? They match the exact timestamps of the emergency alerts." Holloway frowned. "You think the broadcasts are causing this?" Evelyn exhaled. "I think the broadcasts are letting something in." A cold, sick feeling curled in my gut. I thought about the knock at my door, the way it spoke in my brother's voice. Holloway ran a hand over his face. "So what do we do?" I looked at Evelyn. "We need to see the missing people's homes. Something tells me we won't find any signs of struggle." She nodded grimly. "I was thinking the same thing." Holloway grabbed his gun from his desk. "Then let's move." The first house, the Wallace house, sat on the edge of town. A single-story place with an overgrown yard, wind chimes clinking softly in the breeze. The front door was unlocked. Inside, everything looked normal. The lights were still on. The kitchen table was set for breakfast, plates half full, untouched. A television hummed static in the living room, but no one was here. No signs of forced entry. No blood. Just emptiness. I swallowed. "It's like they just vanished." Evelyn walked to the kitchen counter and picked up a cell phone. "Mrs. Wallace's." She tapped the screen. The last call was an outgoing number, placed at 2:14 a.m., the same time something had been outside my station. Holloway crossed his arms. "Who'd she call?" Evelyn stared at the screen. Then slowly, she turned it toward us. The number displayed 911. The final calls. We checked the next house. Same story. Lights on. Food left uneaten. No signs of a struggle. And the worst part? Every single missing person had called 911. Each call placed between 2:10 and 2:15 a.m. Holloway's face darkened. "Where the hell are the dispatch records?" We rushed back to the station, pulling up the 911 logs. They were all there. 9 separate calls between 2:10 and 2:15 a.m., all from different houses, and every single call lasted exactly 45 seconds, then suddenly cut off. I clenched my fists. "Where's the audio?" Holloway clicked on the first file and hit play. A woman's voice came through. "Hello? Please, static." Then a single phrase, repeated over and over. "Open the door." The recording ended. I felt my pulse hammering against my skull. Holloway clicked the next call. "Please, something's outside. It's static. Open the door." Every single call was the same, a desperate voice. Static. And then those 3 words, "Open the door." The voices are spreading. My mind raced. The people who disappeared, they didn't just vanish. They opened the door. Evelyn's eyes were wide. What if the broadcasts change people? Holloway stiffened. "What?" She pointed at the data. "Look, these people were all fine before the alerts. Then, they hear the broadcast and suddenly they're calling 911, letting something in. And then they're gone." Holloway's grip on his gun tightened. "So what, we've got some kind of mind-controlling signal?" Evelyn shook her head. "Not control. influence, like a suggestion, a push in the wrong direction. Just enough to make them open the door. I thought about the night before, the knock at my station, how badly I had wanted to believe it was my brother. It wasn't control, it was manipulation. My stomach twisted. How many more people would fall for it? A sudden realization. I stood suddenly. The emergency alert system. We have to shut it down. Evelyn's expression darkened. If we do that, we won't get any real warnings. Holloway shook his head. If what you're saying is true, these alerts aren't warnings. They're bait. I grabbed the phone. I'll call the state broadcasting office. Tell them we've got a compromised system. Holloway started for the door. I'll get some deputies out on foot. Check the remaining houses. If people are still here, we need to make sure they don't listen to another one of those damn alerts. Evelyn sat down at the computer. I'll try and trace where this signal is coming from. We were moving now, taking action, but something gnawed at the back of my mind. A question I hadn't asked yet. If the emergency alerts weren't coming from the state system anymore, then where were they coming from? A new message. I pressed the phone to my ear as the line rang. Once, twice, then click. A voice answered. But it wasn't a person. It was the emergency alert system. This is an emergency alert. Avoid the new moon. Do not acknowledge them. My blood turned to ice. I pulled the phone away and stared at the screen. I hadn't dialed an emergency line. I had dialed a direct number. A human operator should have answered, but the system had picked up by itself. Then the voice changed. It was no longer automated. It was something else, low, distorted, and it said one word, Daniel, my name. The line went dead. I slowly lowered the phone. My hands were shaking. Then, from the corner of the room, Evelyn's computer screen flickered. A new emergency alert was coming through, but this time, the message wasn't in English. The emergency alert message wasn't in English. Evelyn's computer screen flickered, the words shifting between glitching characters and unreadable symbols. My stomach clenched as I stepped closer. The emergency broadcast system was never supposed to display unknown languages, and yet there it was, a message in something ancient, something wrong. Then the speakers crackled, and I heard a voice, the broadcast that shouldn't exist. The voice came through in slow, distorted syllables, deep, layered, like more than one person was speaking at the same time. The hair on my arms stood up. It wasn't a normal broadcast. Evelyn frantically typed at the keyboard. I don't understand this. The message isn't coming from any registered source. It's just, she stopped. What? I demanded. She pointed at the data stream running alongside the alert. It was an automatic transcription. The system was trying to translate the message into English. One by one, the words converted. We have returned. Listen, follow, become. The voice on the speakers shifted, growing softer, more human. And then I heard something that made my blood turn to ice. Spoke my name. Daniel, the town is changing. I ripped the power cable from Evelyn's computer. The screen flickered and died, the voice cutting off mid-sentence. My breath was ragged. Holloway, who had been silent until now, finally spoke. His voice was steady, but I could see the tension in his jaw. We're shutting it all down. Evelyn looked at him. What? Holloway grabbed his radio. If this thing is spreading through emergency signals, we kill it at the source. Shut off the town's power grid. Take every radio station and television channel offline. Evelyn hesitated. That's not going to stop it permanently. Maybe not, Holloway admitted. But it'll buy us time. I didn't argue. We had no idea how this thing was infiltrating the alert system, but it was getting worse. People were disappearing. The town was too quiet, and now the signal was talking to us. Something is watching. Holloway called the power station and ordered a full blackout. The grid would go down within the hour, but I wasn't convinced it would be enough. Something in my gut told me that whatever was happening wasn't just about the signal. It was here, and it was watching. I turned to Evelyn. You said you were tracking the origin of the signal, right? She nodded. Did you find anything? She hesitated, then reached for her laptop, pulling up a map with seismic activity spikes. One area had been lighting up all night, the western ridge. right where the Wallace family had disappeared, right where she'd first picked up the strange pulses underground. My chest tightened. It was coming from there, a desperate plan. "We need to go," I said. Holloway shot me a look. "Go where?" I pointed at the map. "Whatever this is, it's not just hijacking broadcasts. It's coming from somewhere. We need to see it for ourselves." He exhaled sharply. "You want to drive straight to the source of all this?" Evelyn nodded. "He's right. If we don't understand what we're dealing with, we'll never stop it." Holloway clenched his jaw, but he didn't argue. Instead, he grabbed his shotgun from the rack on the wall and checked the ammo. "Fine," he muttered. "But if something out there tries to make me open the door, I'm putting a hole in it." The road to the ridge. The drive out was eerily silent. No radio, no traffic. The whole town felt hollow, like we were the only ones left. The closer we got to the ridge, the stronger the feeling became. That pressure in the air, that sensation of being watched. Then Evelyn's phone buzzed. A single text message from an unknown number. 3 words. "It sees you." She showed it to me. Her hands were shaking. I didn't know what to say. Holloway pressed harder on the gas. We reached the ridge just before sunset. The sky was bruised red and orange, casting long shadows across the valley. And then we saw them, the footprints, deep grooves in the dirt, stretching in every direction, leading to a cave at the base of the ridge. "Something is waiting." I gripped my flashlight as we stepped out of the truck. The wind was eerily still. No birds, no insects, just silence. Evelyn stared at the cave. "It's coming from in there." Holloway checked his shotgun. "Then let's find out what we're dealing with." We approached the entrance. The air was thick, heavy. The walls of the cave were covered in deep, parallel scratches, like something had been clawing its way out. Then we heard it, a soft, whispering sound, not coming from the cave, from behind us. I turned slowly, and my heart stopped. There were people standing in the field, silent, motionless, watching us. Their faces were empty, blank, like they weren't real, like they were waiting for something. Then, one by one, they began to whisper, "Open the door." The whispering grew louder. "Open the door." A chorus of voices, layered over each other, out of sync. Some slow, some rushed, like a recording played at the wrong speed. Holloway's grip on his shotgun tightened. Back toward the cave. Slowly, Evelyn didn't move. She was staring at the people in the field, if they were even people. Their faces were too smooth. Their mouths moved, but their eyes didn't blink. Then, all at once, they tilted their heads in unison. Perfect, synchronized motion, like something else was controlling them. I forced myself to swallow. We shouldn't be here. Then a sound echoed from inside the cave. A deep, slow inhale, like something breathing. Inside the dark, we had 2 choices. Stay outside with the whispering things in the field. Go into the cave toward whatever was waiting inside. We didn't argue. We moved. The second our feet crossed the threshold, the whispering outside stopped, like someone had cut the sound. My flashlight flickered as I scanned the walls. The scratches we'd seen before were deeper here, stretching along the tunnel like something had been dragged. Evelyn's breath was shaky. This wasn't made by humans. The tunnel sloped downward. The deeper we went, the warmer it got, like we were stepping into the lungs of something alive. Then we heard it again, the breathing, slow, measured, and it was coming from everywhere, a pulse in the dark. We moved carefully. The air was thick, pressing against my skin like static. Then Holloway stopped. "Look at this." He pointed at the ground. The dirt was moving. No, not dirt. A thin layer of something black, shifting under the light. Not quite liquid, not quite solid. It pulsed when the breathing sound filled the cave. Evelyn bent down. She hesitated, then carefully pulled a penlight from her pocket and nudged the substance. The moment she touched it, the breathing stopped. The silence was absolute. Then, from deep inside the tunnel, something moved. Not alone. A sound echoed toward us. Bit. Slow, like something unfolding. I raised my flashlight, trying to see how deep this tunnel went, and that's when I saw them. Not one, many, shapes shifting in the blackness. Human silhouettes distorted, wrong. Some were crawling on the walls. some hung upside down from the ceiling. All of them were watching us. My body locked up. "We need to go." Then the whispers started again. But this time, they were inside the cave. The voices are changing. The whispering wasn't coming from the figures. It was coming from the walls. Evelyn gasped, stepping back. "The cave is..." Before she could finish, the black substance pulsed again, rising, shifting. Then, in one sickening motion, the walls of the cave inhaled, like lungs filling with air. My mind screamed at me to run. Then the voices changed. They became familiar. I froze. A voice I hadn't heard in years whispered my name. "Daniel." I turned toward the sound, and for a second, I saw a face. My brother, smiling. Then he was gone. "The cave wants us." I was shaking. My brother wasn't here. He had been dead for years. This place was playing with us. Holloway fired his shotgun. The blast tore through the cave, ripping a hole in the shifting wall. For a moment, I thought it might do something, but then the hole closed, like the cave had healed itself. Holloway swore, "We need to get the hell out of here." Evelyn grabbed my arm. "Daniel, look." She was pointing at the ground. Where the black substance had been pooling, something was emerging. Not people, not shadows, something older, something wrong, and it was pulling itself up from the earth. We run. The whispers turned to screams, not from the creatures, from the walls. The entire cave shook, like something massive was waking up. I didn't wait. I grabbed Evelyn's arm and ran. Holloway was already ahead, shotgun gripped tight as we raced back up the tunnel. The figures on the walls moved, reaching, stretching, trying to grab us. I felt something brush my shoulder. Cold. Wrong. I lunged forward. The mouth of the cave was right there. We hit the exit at full speed, bursting into the open air. And then, the world wasn't the same. Something changed. The sky was black, not like night, like something had swallowed the stars. Evelyn stumbled, staring upward. "It's not supposed to be the new moon yet." She was right, but the sky said otherwise. Above us, the moon was gone, and in its place, something else was looking down. The sky was wrong. No stars. No moon. Just an empty, black expanse, stretching across the heavens like something had erased the night. My breath came fast and shallow. I looked at Evelyn, then Holloway. Neither of them spoke. They saw it too. We had left the cave, but the world outside wasn't the same anymore. Then, from behind us, the whispering started again. I turned, heart hammering. The figures in the field were still there, still standing motionless, still watching, but something was different now. They weren't just watching, they were smiling. "Something else is here." Evelyn's voice was barely above a whisper. This isn't our town anymore." Holloway's grip on his shotgun tightened. "We're leaving. Now." He turned toward the truck, but then the whispering changed. No longer words, no longer a voice. Now it was laughter, low, unnatural, as if the figures in the field were mimicking something they had heard but didn't understand. Then the truck's headlights flickered on by themselves, and the radio crackled to life. "Do not be afraid." I knew that voice. It was the same one from the emergency alert system, the one that had spoken my name. But now it was outside the system. It was here. "The air is wrong." Evelyn grabbed my arm, pulling me toward the truck. "We have to go, Daniel. Now." I didn't argue. We sprinted toward the vehicle. Holloway yanked open the driver's side door and threw himself in, already turning the key in the ignition. The engine rumbled to life, but the radio kept talking. "We have always been here." I jumped into the back seat. Evelyn climbed in beside me, slamming the door shut. Holloway floored the gas pedal. The tires screeched against the dirt. The truck lurched forward, speeding away from the ridge, but the figures in the field didn't move. They just stood there, smiling, watching us leave, like they knew something we didn't. A town without a sky. We drove fast. Too fast. The road blurred under the headlights, winding back toward town. But the farther we got, the worse the air felt. It was thick, heavy, like the atmosphere itself had changed. Evelyn wiped at her nose, and when she pulled her hand away, her fingers were streaked with blood. I swallowed hard. "Are you okay?" She didn't answer, just stared out the window. I followed her gaze, and my stomach twisted. The town was wrong. The houses were there. The buildings. The streets. But the lights were gone. Every window was pitch black, like the entire town was abandoned. Or worse, like no one inside was turning on the lights anymore. The signal has spread. We hit the main road, heading toward the police station. But the closer we got, the more I realized the radio towers were dark. No blinking red lights, no signals. Evelyn's hands curled into fists. They turned the power off. Holloway grunted. That was the plan. No, don't you get it? Her voice was sharp. It didn't stop the signal. I felt cold. She was right. The emergency alert had been spreading through broadcasts, through the airwaves. But now the signal was in the town itself. It didn't need electricity anymore. It was everywhere. Something is in the station. We pulled up to the police station. It was completely dark. No cars outside. No voices. I checked my phone. No signal. Holloway grabbed his shotgun. Stay close. We stepped inside. The air was stale. The whole building felt empty, but it wasn't. We heard something down the hall, a soft scuffling sound, like someone dragging their feet. Holloway raised his shotgun. Identify yourself. Silence. Then a figure stumbled into view. Sheriff Owens. But his eyes weren't right. The sheriff is smiling. He stood in the doorway, head tilted at an unnatural angle. His mouth stretched too wide, his teeth too white, like he was trying too hard to look human. Evelyn sucked in a sharp breath. Oh my God! Sheriff Owens twitched. His body jerked like a marionette. Then he spoke, but it wasn't his voice. Daniel, the same voice from the emergency alert system. The thing wearing Sheriff Owens' skin took a step forward. Holloway didn't hesitate. He fired. The shotgun blast ripped through the sheriff's chest. But there was no blood, only static, like the sound of an old radio, hissing and warping, shifting into laughter. Low, endless, and Sheriff Owens just kept smiling. It's already too late, Evelyn screamed. I grabbed her arm, yanking her back toward the exit. Holloway fired again. Another direct hit, and this time, Sheriff Owens fell apart. Not like a man, not like flesh and bone, like a signal breaking. His body fragmented, dissolving into pieces of static, glitching and distorting. His mouth still smiling as his face broke into 1,000 shards of nothing. Then he was gone. No body, no blood, just an empty uniform crumpled on the floor, and a voice still whispering from everywhere. IT sees you. We are not safe. We didn't stop running. We barreled out of the station, back into the darkened streets. Evelyn was sobbing. What the hell is happening? I didn't have an answer, because there was no answer. The emergency alert wasn't just a broadcast anymore. It wasn't just a message. It had become something else. It had taken people. Sheriff Owens wasn't infected. He was replaced. And that meant I turned, staring down the streets of the empty town. How many others had already been taken? How many weren't real anymore? Holloway gritted his teeth. We need to find a way to stop this. I shook my head. I wasn't sure if we could. Above us, the sky was still watching, and the new moon was just getting started. We ran. The police station was dead. No backup. No safe place. Sheriff Owens had fallen apart into static, and the emergency alert wasn't just a message anymore. It was alive. Holloway gritted his teeth, gripping his shotgun like a lifeline. Evelyn kept wiping her nose, her fingers streaked with fresh blood. Something was wrong with the air. It was thick with an invisible pressure, pushing against my skull like an unheard frequency, vibrating beneath my skin. Presence, watching, waiting. I swallowed hard. We weren't safe anywhere. Then Evelyn whispered, "The hospital." Holloway and I turned to her. "There's a backup generator there," she said quickly. "If we can get it running, we might be able to broadcast something back. Something that could stop it." It was a long shot, a desperate shot, but it was all we had. We took off toward the hospital. The streets are listening. We kept to the shadows, sprinting between darkened buildings. No streetlights, no cars. Everything was too quiet. Then I saw movement, not people. Shadows, something shifting between the houses, sliding along walls in ways that didn't make sense. I forced myself to keep moving, The hospital was only a few blocks away. Holloway glanced at the sky. Still no moon. My stomach twisted. We weren't just dealing with the absence of light. Something had taken its place, and it was looking down. We reached the hospital entrance. The doors were already open, like something had been waiting for us. Inside the hospital, the moment we stepped in, I felt it. The humming, low deep in my skull, like a pulse. The emergency alerts frequency wasn't just a sound anymore. It was in the walls. Evelyn shuddered. "Can you hear that?" I nodded. Holloway didn't answer, but his grip on the shotgun tightened. The hospital was dark. Emergency lights flickered dimly in the hallways, stuttering like they were afraid. Then a sound, soft, like breathing, but not from a person, from the building itself. The hospital is changing. We moved carefully, heading for the backup generator. The hallways were too long. I didn't remember them being this long. Every now and then, I caught a glimpse of movement in the dark. Not people, but outlines, shifting in the periphery of my vision. Then the intercom clicked on. Static poured from the speakers. Then a voice. "Do not adjust your set." My breath hitched. The voice was speaking directly to us. "The broadcast has been interrupted." Evelyn grabbed my arm. "Daniel, it knows. We see you." The voice was coming from every speaker, every hallway, every room. The emergency alert had already spread through the hospital. And it wasn't just a signal anymore. It was becoming something else. The generator room. We made it to the basement. The generator room was at the end of a long, narrow corridor. It was open. Inside, the generator loomed like a metal beast, dormant. Holloway moved first. He set down his shotgun and began flipping switches, muttering under his breath. I turned to Evelyn. "If we can get it running, how do we broadcast?" She pulled a small radio transmitter from her backpack. "We use this. It's a test model, but if we connect it to the PA system, we might be able to send out a countersignal." My stomach twisted. "Might?" She shot me a look. "Do you have a better idea?" I didn't. Then the lights flickered, and the whispering returned. "The broadcast is not alone." The voice came from inside the room, not from a speaker, not from a radio, from the air itself. "Why are you running?" Evelyn inhaled sharply. The shadows in the corners of the room stretched. Then they stepped forward. Figures. Not human. Tall, wavering, like they were being broadcast from a broken screen. But their faces, they were people we knew. Sheriff Owens, the old diner owner, a child I had seen playing outside just days ago. All of them smiling. "You are already part of the signal." The humming grew louder, and the figures moved. "We have to broadcast." Holloway slammed the switch. The generator roared to life. The emergency lights blazed overhead, cutting through the dark. The figures glitched. For a second, they froze, like the light had disrupted them. Evelyn fumbled with the transmitter. "I need time. Just a few minutes." Holloway raised his shotgun. "You've got one." The figures twitched. Then all at once they lunged, holding them off. I grabbed a metal pipe from the floor. It wasn't much, but it was all I had. The first figure, Sheriff Owens, glitched forward. His body flickered, appearing and disappearing in jerking, unnatural movements. Then his mouth unhinged. A burst of static filled the air. It wasn't sound. It was something physical, force knocking me backward. Holloway fired. The shotgun blast tore through Sheriff Owens, but there was no blood, only fragments of signal breaking apart. The other figures kept coming, their bodies stretched, elongated, not bound by human shapes anymore. And the voice inside the hospital whispered, "You cannot stop the broadcast." The countersignal. Evelyn slammed the transmitter down. "Done." She flipped the switch. A new sound blared through the speakers. Low, piercing. The figures froze. Their bodies convulsed. Then they screamed. The entire hospital shook. The walls rippled like liquid, the emergency lights bursting in showers of sparks. And the figures, they broke. Their bodies shattered into static. Then all at once, they were gone. But it's not over. We stood there gasping, waiting, but nothing moved. The whispering had stopped. The hospital was silent. Evelyn wiped sweat from her forehead. "Did it work?" I swallowed hard. "I don't know." Then Holloway whispered, "Look outside." We turned. Through the shattered hospital windows, the sky was still black. The The new moon was still missing, and something else was still up there, watching, waiting, because this wasn't just a signal anymore. It was something much, much worse. The town was silent, no movement, no wind, no signs of life, but we knew the silence was lying. The emergency alert had changed something. It wasn't just a signal anymore. It had become a presence, watching, waiting. The counter-signal had driven the figures away, but only for now. We had won a battle, not the war. Holloway stood by the broken window, gripping his shotgun. Evelyn was crouched by the radio transmitter, her hands still hovering over the controls. Nobody spoke, because the sky was still wrong, and the new moon hadn't returned. Something is coming. I could still feel it. The humming, deep in my bones, like the town itself was a radio left on, tuned to a dead station. Holloway exhaled sharply. "We can't stay here." Evelyn looked up at him. "Where the hell do you suggest we go?" "The next town over. Hell, anywhere with a functioning station. We send a warning out to the world. Tell them what's happening here." I swallowed hard. "And if it's already spread?" Evelyn's eyes darkened. "Then we find another way to stop it." I wanted to believe her, but deep down I knew this wasn't just a broadcast anymore. It was something alive, and it was learning. The town is changing. We left the hospital. The streets were still empty, but the air felt charged, like a thunderstorm about to break. The buildings looked different. Not wrong exactly, but off, like they weren't completely solid, like they were echoes of themselves. Holloway was the first to notice. "Look at the street signs." I turned and my stomach twisted. The words were warped, not misspelled, not vandalized, like they had been badly translated from another language. Main Street had become M at NSTR ####. City Hall was now CDNH at 11. Like the town itself was glitching, like it wasn't just broadcasting the signal, it was becoming part of it. The last transmission, the radio in Holloway's truck crackled to life. A voice, "Do not adjust your set." It was stronger now, more real. Evelyn's hands clenched into fists. "Get in the truck. Now." We didn't argue. We jumped in and Holloway floored it. The road blurred under the headlights. The signal warp signs flickered past us, and the voice on the radio kept talking. "The broadcast has been interrupted. New signal acquired." My blood ran cold. Evelyn turned to me, her expression tight. "It's adapting." The emergency alert was evolving, and it had just locked onto us. The highway is gone. We should have been at the highway by now, but the road just kept going. Mile after mile, Holloway's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. "This ain't right." I turned, looking out the back window. The town was still behind us, not growing smaller, not fading into the distance, still right behind us, like we hadn't left at all. Evelyn whispered, "We're not moving." I felt sick, not because we were stuck, but because the town was moving with us, like it was keeping us inside, like it had decided we were part of the signal now. "Do not adjust your set." The radio hissed. Then, for the first time, the emergency alert laughed. Not a recording, not a distortion, a real sentient laugh. Holloway punched the dashboard. "Get out of my goddamn radio." But it wasn't just the radio anymore. The sky was humming. The buildings were whispering. The whole town was vibrating with a voice that wasn't a voice. A broadcast turned into a presence. Presence turned into a mind, and it saw us. Evelyn grabbed my hand. "Daniel." I turned to her. Her nose was bleeding again. Her eyes were wide. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at my reflection in the window. I followed her gaze, and my own reflection was smiling. We're already inside the signal. My heart stopped. I wasn't smiling, but the version of me in the glass was too wide, too many teeth. I jerked away from the window. My reflection stayed there a moment longer, watching me. Then it glitched and disappeared. Evelyn clutched my arm. "It's not trying to spread anymore." I barely managed to whisper. "What?" She turned to me, her face pale. "It's not a signal infecting people. It's not trying to convert us." She swallowed hard. "It's replacing us. One last chance." We had one option left. Evelyn grabbed the radio transmitter, yanking wires free. "I can reverse the frequency." but it has to be inside the town. Holloway didn't hesitate. He spun the truck around, gunning it back toward the hospital. The sky flickered, the buildings warped, the signal was fighting back. The voice came again, deep and endless. You cannot leave. You cannot stop the broadcast. The hospital came into view. The emergency generator was still running, the red lights pulsing like a heartbeat. We skidded to a stop. We had one shot, the final transmission. We sprinted inside. Evelyn slammed the transmitter down, rewiring it frantically. The town shook. The walls glitched. A shadow stepped forward. Sheriff Owens. Not his body. Not a ghost. Just a broken copy of him. He smiled too wide. You are already part of US. Evelyn flipped the switch. The counter signal blared, a sound like tearing static, cutting through the town. Sheriff Owens screamed. No, the whole town screamed. The air split apart. Buildings glitched. The sky shuddered. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I saw the moon. Did we win? The signal collapsed. The sky reset, and we were standing in an empty town. No voices, no figures, no whispers, but something still felt off. Holloway's hands trembled. It's quiet. Evelyn exhaled, wiping blood from her nose. Too quiet, and I knew we hadn't stopped it. We had just turned the volume down. For now, somewhere, buried beneath the normalcy of the world, the signal was still waiting, and when the next new moon came, it would broadcast again.